delighted for the first time one of our Zooms are actually coming live from Burgundy, which seems very appropriate. I'm here with Étienne de Montille. We're at one of his many haunts in Burgundy, Chateau de Puligny. We were hoping to do it outside, but it got a little windy, so hence the delay. We had to move inside. We've got some fantastic wines to taste through later on, and Etienne will give us all the inside information on all of those. But I really just want to start, Etienne, if you could give someone a little background onto the history of de Montille.
Of course, with pleasure, with pleasure. So, you know, the Domaine de Montille goes back quite a while, and it's fairly ancient because it was founded by my ancestor about 300 years ago. We are still determining the exact date, but basically we hope to celebrate the centenary within a decade, and so it's not exceptional in Burgundy. You have quite a few domains that goes back quite far in the history, but it's still a fairly substantial piece of experience and history. And as all those historical domains, they were golden age and more darker time. And one of the golden age of the Domaine de Montille was in the mid-19th century, where Domaine de Montille was owning and farming about 30 hectares of top vineyards that will be now probably all Grand Cru or top Premier Cru. We had some Pommard, we had some Musigny and Amoureuse, but unfortunately, but there is no judgment in that, it's just the course of history. Unfortunately, there was 3 generations after the mid-19th century that was selling up the vineyard. And when my father took over, there was only 2.5 hectares left from that beautiful 30 hectares land base in the mid-19th century. And my father very quickly understood that there was not that many options. Either it will be the 4th generation to sell off most of the vineyard, and that would be the end of the Domaine de Montille adventure in the world of wine. Either he will have to rebuild the estate. And very fortunately, he was passionate about wine. He was passionate about the history of Burgundy and the kind of unique history of wine of Burgundy. And he decided to make the wine that he likes, the one that he likes to drink, the one that he likes to share, and bottle his wine, which was very rare at the time, and also, of course, to increase and enlarge the land base, so it will be sustainable and manageable. And he bought some beautiful vineyards to bring it to a size of about 10-11 hectares at the very early at the end of the 20th century. And when I took over in 2001, I had in mind to pursue, and it was not only in mind, it was a kind of goal to pursue his vision and try to restore the domain in the size and the quality of the vineyard base as the domain enjoyed it in the mid-19th century. And I'm fairly happy to share with you that this is now mission accomplished, because we're now farming and owning and farming about 37 hectares of vineyard. We couldn't find some Musigny, we couldn't find some Amoureuse, but c'est dommage. But in the meantime, we could find some pretty nice vineyards like the Malconsort or the Corton Clos du Roi and the Corton Charlemagne, Puligny Caillerets, Chevalier Montrachet, and many other very good vineyards that are now part of Domaine Burgundy, of Domaine de Montille. And so this is it. This is we over 2 generations. we succeed with my father to rebuild the estate. And now that things are settled here, we have decided to venture a little bit outside of our comfort zone, and we very happily launched a project in California, in an area that is close to Santa Barbara, that is part of Santa Barbara AVA, and that is, in my opinion, one of the very best wine region for growing very balanced, elegant, low alcohol and high acidity Pinot and Chardonnay. And I'm talking about the Santa Rita Hills area. And we also venture in something that is more kind of a personal quest and something that is more about a collective work. We are developing together with the community of winemaker in Japan, a vineyard in Hokkaido, to grow also some Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. But that's
not for this year.
Not for this year. It's a little bit out there, but it's a beautiful project of sharing experience from Burgundy and knowledge of the site and inspiration from Japan, which I'm absolutely fond of the culture and the sense of details and excellence. So we will see. The first vintage will be produced in 2023. So this is where we're at. But now I'm very happy to be with my dear and old friend, Jason.
Not that old.
Not that old, but it's old friend in Burgundy. Is very affectuous and a very nice way to introduce a friend.
Well, I was going to ask, Etienne, before we get started on the tasting, which we will do in a moment, is it a true story that one of the reasons that the Muzzini was sold back in the day is because it was considered to be too far from Volnay?
I don't know. What I know is that, and that's pretty interesting for the audience and for the wine lover, is that until very recently, vineyards in Burgundy was not yielding anything. You have to remember that you have to know or remember that Domaine de Montille didn't make any profit before the mid-60s. The entire village of Meursault was in critical situation in the 70s, and the economics really gets better and incredibly good actually in the last 20 to 30 years. So that's fairly recent, and all colleagues of my generation, and of course the generation before, we have this clearly in head, and we are very much aware that the attention and the success that Burgundy enjoys today, it's just a very short time in the entire history of Burgundy. And we are very conscious of that, and we are also very conscious about our obligation and duty to maintain the land and the potential of the land, and in the best fashion for the next generation to enjoy the privilege of farming those extraordinary terroirs. And we're also very conscious that we have to be faithful to the style and the history of Burgundy as it was established over 2 millennia, which is also unique. You don't have that many regions enjoying so much history in the world.
Okay, well, look, we're all getting thirsty, I'm sure. We've got 3 fascinating white wines from 3 different vintages. We're starting off with the 2015 Bourgogne Chardonnay, which is a vintage I personally think is incredibly underrated. It had the misfortune to follow 2014, which I think is widely accepted as one of the great white Burgundy vintages. Etienne may have something to say about that, but I think people should have another look at 2015 as an incredibly stable white wine vintage. All the focus was on the red wines, but it's a really interesting vintage. Anyway, we're starting with the Bourgogne Chardonnay. Etienne, can you firstly tell us where the vines are for this and a little bit about how it's made?
So, Burgundy, I mean, when it comes to generic Burgundy, usually it's a blend of several parcels that could be located in different villages. It happens that our Bourgogne Blanc comes exclusively from Puligny. Just after the Clos du Château that we can even show you if you want to, which is just behind. So that Burgundy has a sense of the place. It's not a blend of different vineyards that will be located, you know, on the upper side of the mountain, and then the lower side, the lower part of the mountain, and or enjoying some less favorable exposure. No, it's a great vineyard that is located just right behind us, and on Puligny-Morachet. And we hope that this translates into the wine, having that kind of Puligny, you know, fluency and the mineral-driven character, and also always disclosing a great deal of freshness and balance, even in warm vintages like 15.
Can you remember when you began harvesting in 2015?
No, but I would not be able to tell you the exact date. But what I know is that for all of white wine, we are very careful to pick. Of course, we want to pick at the right time. Everyone wants to do that. But if we have to take a risk, we prefer to pick slightly before than slightly after. So in 15 was probably at the beginning of September.
And in terms of vinification, aged in oak, presumably?
Any oak, any aged oak, it is aged in 600-liter barrels. We love that format of barrel. This is more, you know, 600-liter barrels as compared to the 228 offer more less oxidation, more lees contact, and therefore it is qualified as reductive élevage instead of the oxidative élevage with the traditional barrique, and especially if it's a new barrique because you have more air coming through. So we want to enhance the freshness and the mineral driven quality of this wine. We like our wine to be very vibrant, having a little hint of reduction.
There's still a bit of reduction.
And there's still
on this now. Is there any new oak amongst?
There is no new oak.
New oak
the Bourgogne, no.
In terms of where do you rate 2015 as a vintage, both to enjoy and to keep for white wine?
As a difference with vintage like 14, 15, 14, 13, 12, 15 and 16 also are vintages that are more approachable. They are more integrated. They offer more opulence and more roundness, and therefore they are more suitable for earlier consumption rather than 12. Well, 12 might be ready by now, but it was not. You know, it was a vintage that requires a little cellar aging, or 17, of course, and 18 that would need a little bit of cellar aging, but mainly 17 and 14 are the two vintages that needs a little bit of age.
And in terms of the production level of this wine, how big is the clos outside?
We have this is not the Clos du Château.
Okay,
this is just behind the Clos du Château, and our Bourgogne Blanc at Domaine de Montille is composed of 3 vineyards, but located very near one to each other, and the total surface is 2.8 hectares.
I think it's terrific. I think actually the vivacity of that is amazing. The acidity, the slightly reductive element is lovely. And that, For a rich vintage, to get that level of tension and purity is just fantastic. Tasting that blind, I think you could happily say that's, you know, village Puligny without any problem at all.
But that's probably the benefit of being very careful on the harvest date and you know, edging on harvesting a little bit before the full ripeness, because with the change in the climate, with those those new parameters where the late phase of the ripening now occurs in August or end of August or very beginning of September, the light and the warmth is so different from what it was if you were harvesting at the end of September or beginning of October. And things happen very, very quickly during the last week of ripening. And you have to be extremely careful and reactive.
So even 2 days in that time can be the difference.
2 days or 3 days at that time represent what was 4 days or 5 days 30 or 40 years ago.
Yeah.
So the window for harvesting is narrowing down.
Does that mean you have to have more pickers on board so that you can harvest?
You have to be
more reactively.
You have to be reactive. You have to be ready. And if you have to press the button, you have to be sure that everything is ready behind, you know, the troops and the equipment, and that the cellar is ready. You know, you've seen. Brian is the winemaker at Domaine de Montille, and also Jacques here. They left at the beginning of the week, but we can come back anytime, even if it's 2 weeks time, everything is ready to start. We don't have anything to do in the cellar. Everything is ready. So
if you suddenly have a dramatic heat wave for the next, I mean, it's already quite warm, but it gets warmer.
You know, exactly. Ready to go. The weather is very gentle this year compared to the previous years, but still warm, as you can see. And we're set to harvest around the 22nd. We don't know whether it will be the 20th or whether the 24th, but now at the beginning of the season, it was more the 25th or the 26th. It moved back to the 22nd now, and everything is going to happen because we are just 4 weeks from it, and everything can happen in terms of not everything, but if it's very warm, it would be the 20th. If it's okay, it will be the 22nd. If it's a little bit colder than expected, it will be the 24th or 25th.
I mean, looking at some of the vineyards, they look in fantastic condition.
This year, yes. We don't have any pressure disease. We have a little bit of odium for the white, but otherwise for the red, we rarely seen actually a vineyard in such good condition. That was a great growing season in terms of weather.
Is there enough water in the soil?
So far, yes, but we probably need a 30 milliliters of water, 30 to 40 before harvesting. If we don't have it, you know, there will be less wine, and some of the vineyard that are lying on shallow soils and close to the bedrocks may suffer from hydric stress, and they may shut down. So a little bit of rain, as I say, you know, maybe in 1 or twice on 2 times will be great.
So all of you watching could do a little rain dance over the next week. That would be fantastic. We may just have another vintage of the century on our hands.
We're not in Bordeaux. We don't have vintage of century every year here. But
well, I think we better move on to wine number 2, which is a fantastic vineyard in one of the, I think, most underrated appellations in Burgundy. Probably it's the 2016 Saint-Aubin Premier Cru En Remilly. So firstly, perhaps a little bit about the vineyard and exactly where it is, and a bit about the vintage as well.
So the vineyard is, you know, Saint-Aubin is the underrated appellation in the Côte de Beaune. Obviously, there are magnificent wine, you know, from Saint-Aubin, There are great terroirs, and most of those great terroirs are located on the entrance of the valley, because Saint-Aubin is a little bit remoted from the coast. It doesn't line up like Meursault, Puligny, Chassagne. It's a little bit further west and further higher. But you have a valley, and all the vineyards that are located on facing south, so on the northern part, but facing south in the valley, are beautiful. And Remilly is one of the closest with Merger de Danchin to the Holy Grail, where you have the Montrachet, the Chevalier Montrachet, and you just a kind of stone throw from it. You know, you don't have more than 300, 400 meters. And we are lucky to be on at the entrance of the valley, so very close to that Holy Grail. And it's one of my favorite vineyards, because you have southern exposure that give you year in, year out the appropriate ripeness. It's a shallow soil, very stony, and you have that kind of balance. It's a kind of ridge where and a trail that will be on a ridge, where you have the power of the power and the engine, you know, and coming from the southern exposure, and at the same time the restrained character from a shallow, stony soil. So it's a balance between those two parameters that build up this beautiful wine en Remilly, which is one of the best known lieux-dits in Remilly, in Saint-Aubin, I'm sorry. And the vineyard is fairly old. It's about 60 years old. So we always get a very intense and not, you know, a limited crop, but the grapes are always great. And I really love this wine. It's one of my favorite wines. It offers a great deal of quality for value.
En Remilly is quite a big vineyard, isn't it?
It is, but you have a lot of different subparts.
Yeah.
We are located mid-slopes, and as I said, at the end of the valley, so very close to Montrachet and the Chevalier. And the mid-slope, as you know, in Burgundy is usually the best area.
Would this generally be harvested before or after the other white wines you make, like Lily, the Bourgogne Chardonnay?
I mean, harvested?
Yes.
It's probably it's one of the early vineyard to be harvested, thanks to his southern exposure. Okay.
And in terms of vinification, are you doing anything differently to the Bourgogne we tasted here earlier?
Not really, except that there will be a little bit of new oak, 15% of new oak, but otherwise everything, we handle our white wine more or less the same, you know, very gentle and long pressing. We take a lot of lees. We give time for the lees to settle, so we can select as much as possible of clean and nice lees and embark them into the barrels. Then you have a 1 year barrel aging with very limited new oak. And then after we rack everything together with the lees in a stainless steel tank for the second phase of the aging for a period of between 4 and 6 months, and then we bottle the wine gently after the fining. And this is more or less true for all wine we do from the Bourgogne Blanc up to the Caillerets or Chevalier Montrachet or Corton Charlemagne. The only difference may be how much new oak we will use, and sometimes some of the wine needs to have a second élevage, not in stainless steel, but in oak, and that will be the only difference. But that's very rare. It's when the wine are really tight, acidic, vintage Jacques 13, for example, or 11. We did that for a few cuvées.
In terms of, obviously, there have been a few issues, not necessarily with your wines, but across Burgundy with wines maturing prematurely. In terms of levels of sulfur at bottling? What do you like to leave as free? How much free sulfur do you like in wine?
We usually around 25 to 30, 25 for the 20 to 25 for the Bourgogne and you know, easygoing like Montille Premier Cru Les Caillerets or the Rugy and the wine and the Maison de Montille, because they are intended to drink fairly early. And then when we move to when we move up the ladder and go and eat the Premier Cru, it's more 30 to 35 free sulfur. And we as you rightly recorded, we were it as well as everyone else by the Primox things, and we've taken a series of corrective action. One of them is actually embarking a lot of lees, because lees are reductive. Another corrective action is to age through big barrels, 600 barrels, and to have the second aging phase, not in barrel, but in stainless tank, which is reductive and keep the freshness. And then the third thing that is that you can see is that we are using Diam.
Oh yes,
cork.
Yes.
We can always discuss about the benefit, the pros and the cons about using that kind of closure and this kind of closure or that kind of closure. We've just found out that for white wine, Diam is likely the best closure or the less bad closure. I don't know how to put it. But what we know is that it ensures a consistency, you know, among the bottles. You don't have any more bottle variation, or very, very limited bottle variation. It does also ensure a tight sealing, and it fights against the oxidation. And the last but not the least benefit of Diam is that you don't have any more cork bottle, because it's certified, and the process of use for producing those Diam cork is certified to be free of any cork taint. So that's if you add up all the benefits, you know, it's.
When did you start using Diam?
Oh, that's a long time. We were one of the very first to use Diam. We first used Diam in 2007. Okay. And now we have 13 years of experience, and we still, of course, pulling out the cork of some early bottle that was under Diam closure. And very honestly with you, we just like the effect of cork and the impact and the effect of the Diam cork for white wine. It keeps the wine fresh. It doesn't prevent the development of complexity. It's probably slow down a little bit the aging of the wine, and it protects as well the reductive character that we like. So
presumably you use different levels of Diam. So
yes, you have Diam 10 and Diam 30 exactly. Yeah. So you see the Caillerets is on Diam 30, and the Diam the Saint-Aubin and the Bourgogne Blanc are on Diam 10. Because if it's too tight for wine that are intended to drink a little bit earlier on, it might close down. It may close down the wine a little bit.
Just before we move on to the Caillerets that you mentioned, that's one thing I forgot to ask you. The first vintage of Saint-Aubin that you made was which?
But Saint-Aubin has always been a vineyard under Château de Puligny Montrachet, and actually for you, what we did is that we took a barrel and bottled it under Maison de Montille, but it was coming from the same source, you know, being, I forget to say, but this is something important, that Domaine de Montille and before Château de Puligny, we are certified organic, and we're practicing biodynamic on the entire vineyard. So we've been making Saint-Aubin for about 25 years.
Are you certified biodynamic? Or
we're not. We are certified. We won't be certified in the future because we don't recognize in those associations and those certification association the level of tolerance and openness that we hope we could find. But we will remain certified organic, of course. It's a long story, but it's more kind of philosophical debate, but we are practicing biodynamic, and actually here at the Château de Puligny, it's one of the center where all the biodynamic people around this area, in Côte de Beaune and even Côte de Nuits, and Chardonnays gather to get some courses and seminar and do some experiment in the clos. So we are really into it. After it becomes political, and this is the sad thing about it.
Okay, and just lastly, on when just remind us all when you bought the chateau and all the vineyards that came with it.
So the Château de Puligny was owned by a bank, and they called me on in 2002 to manage the estate. And then in 2012, Domaine de Montille acquired the estate. And in 2017, we decided to, partly because of the EU regulation on commercial names, because you cannot, the EU, there was a new EU regulation forbidding to use the name of the AOC into a brand name. Mm-hmm. Château de Puligny-Montrachet. Puligny-Montrachet being an AOC, we were asked to discontinue the use of the brand. So in 2017, we decided to move everything at the Domaine de Montille. And now all the wine that we are farming and all the vineyards we're farming and all the wine coming from those vineyards are under the Montille from 2017 onward.
No, makes sense. Well, I thought that was terrific. I think I'm going to like this next wine even more. This is the Puligny-Montrachet Les Caillerets Premier Cru. Then this is one of your early purchases. This was
the first white wine to be part of Domaine de Montille after, since the 20th century. Because there was some white, I understood why there was a little bit of white wine at Domaine de Montille before at the golden age in the mid 19th century. But when my father took over in 1947, there was only a few vineyards in Volnay. So in '93, he acquired that pieces of Puligny Le Cailleret, and it was kind of a dream for him, because if you look where Puligny Le Cailleret is located, it's difficult to enjoy better location, It's the prolongation of Le Montrachet on the same level. It's above Le Pucelle, below the Chevalier Montrachet. I mean, come on, that's a pretty decent neighborhood.
How much did you buy?
We farmed 85 hectares of Cailleret, which is a fairly sizable piece of this vineyard, and we are the first row against Le Montrachet.
How big is the vineyard in its entirety?
5 hectares, 5.5 hectares.
Yeah, so you've got a very nice slug of it. Is in terms of the soil, you mentioned Chevalier above, Montrachet to the left as you look. What's the main difference in soil makeup
between Chevalier and Cailleret?
Between Chevalier and Cailleret and Montrachet and Cailleret. Yeah. Nice easy question for you.
Not an easy question. We know that in all that area, it's fairly sometimes it's fairly simple, but on the other hand, we all know it's very much more complex than that. But basically, the further up you go on the slopes, the more stone and limestone you have, and the more shallow is the soil. And the more down you go, the more downhill you go, the more clay you have, and in between you have the perfect mix of clay and limestone. It happens that in this area, the Chevalier, of course, enjoy a more stony and less deep soil, but still have a wonderful clay that keep the moisture and keep the vines happy. But having, lying on close to the bedrock and on a very stony soil, the Chevalier always, we think that the Chevalier has a kind of a supreme elegance and refinement thanks to that limestone environment. And then you go very downhill and you have the Bâtard Montrachet that lies in a deeper clayey soil, but still being, you know, aerated with thanks to the little stones. But the Bâtard enjoys a reputation to be more powerful and richer, more opulent. And in between, you have where on the same level of land as the Caillerets, you have Le Montrachet, which combines the quality of both terroirs. And Le Cailleret has that, as it enjoys exact same situation, same location on the slope, same position on the slope as Le Montrachet, in my opinion, gathers a little bit the benefit of, you know, the mineral and driven character and elegance and very, very fine, and also some richness and coming from downhill. So you have the Caillerets, you have also that perfect mix of limestone and clay.
And 2017 for you, white wine?
Great vintage. In my opinion, you know, the best vintage since 14. It's a great sense of transparency, vibrancy.
A fairly straightforward vintage during the season?
It was not easy. It was not easy. Odium and mildew was an issue, and but this is a good actually. Thank for asking the question, because that was a challenging year. Let's face it, that was a challenging year. But we and when you have to face those challenges, just being organic and biodynamic, it even rendered the challenge you know, more difficult. But we pass, and we were very happy with the crop, the quality of the crop, the quantities still very decent. We lost a little bit in between in the course of the season, but we're very happy. And this is one of those vintages where, like the 13 vintage or some other vintage, some other top vintage, where you feel that even, you know, taking the challenging option of being organic and biodynamic, you can still manage those challenging growing season parameters, and it's one of those vintage that comfort you and say, hey, we're not going to go back to any chemical thing. No, because we can handle it. We can manage.
You can survive a vintage.
We can survive, exactly. We have enough experience.
Not just survive, but
and it built up the confidence. It just built up the confidence year after year in organic and biodynamic practices. You know, that we are ready to face any challenging situation.
And in terms of new oak, do we have a little bit more?
20%, 20%, yeah, 25 maybe.
Do you think this wine will shut down at the moment? I find it quite expressive.
Shut down. 17 are those, you know, they are part of those beautiful vintages where they will not shut down. I don't think so. They might get a little bit more close, but it would be only for a few years. But I agree with you, and we are 2 years down the line, you know, after bottling, and it's
well, it does have that perfect mix. You were talking about the soil, you know, that mix of intensity and weight and real drive and energy. I mean, it's for a wine that is some way short of its prime. It's fantastic. Yeah.
It's saline, with a saline character, which is part of the cachet of the Domaine de Montille. We love that salinity in a white wine.
Anyone watching, would you advise them, if they have some, and if they don't, I think there might be a few cases you can still buy. We'll get that one in. Yeah, when would you advise them to start drinking their case?
The Caillerets?
Yeah.
If you can wait for a few years, you will your patience will be rewarded.
Yeah.
But you can enjoy as we all tasted here. We can enjoy it tonight. But we know the benefit of the time on those great terroirs. It will bring complexity. It will bring a sense of integration that will take the wine to a higher level. So I would say 3 to 5 years times, or 3 to 7, depending, on the storage condition.
And one last question before we move on to the reds. Actually, we've got a question coming in there from, do you use batonnage at all?
As little as possible. And it's part of the way as well. It's part of the process of fighting the premix. The more you do batonnage, the more you intake oxygen. And on the top of that, it fattens the wine. And this is not the style of the domain. I'm not judging that my colleagues, who are practicing batonnage on a more frequent basis. I'm just saying that it's not our style. We are more, we look more for the vibrancy, for the freshness, for the depth, and rather than the volume and the roundness and the spheric aspect of the wine. And we know that too much batonnage could be prejudicial to the ageability of the wine.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. We'll move on to the reds. I hope you're happy with my thoughts. Are we should probably start with the Volnay and move on through the Pommards.
Yeah, although you may want to add the 15 after the 14 because of its monumental structure.
Okay, so we're going to start with the Volnay Mitans 2016. So this is one of the original vineyards, isn't it? Okay.
No, Volnay Mitans was purchased by my father in '76, but the original vineyard was Volnay. Thank you. And a little bit of Pommard Rugiens.
How was 2016 for the red wines in the Côte de Beaune?
It was a vintage that pleased any domain that wants to. I'm just yes. That please any domain that is keen to make terroir-driven wine, because you have a great deal of transparency in 16, maybe even more than 15, because 15 was so monumental that it sometimes crushes down the details of the terroir. 16 was a perfect vintage to translate all details and nuances of the terroir. That's what we call the transparent vintages.
I mean, you're one of the few vignerons to have great vineyards in both coats. Was 16 as good in the Côte de Beaune as it was in the Côte de Nuits, in your opinion?
It's one of the vintage, where you hardly see some differences. As a difference with 14, 13, or 18. 14, 13 and 14 being definitely in favor of Côte de Nuits. And actually in 13, I remember the more you go north, the better it was. Yeah. The Chambertin was incredibly successful. Well, it was fairly challenging here. And in 18, it's the reverse. You have more freshness, more balance in the Côte de Beaune. Sometimes the wine of the Côte de Nuits are a little bit over alcoholic and a little bit, lack a little bit of peps and energy and things like that. But 16, my opinion was even in both coves.
And what can you tell us about the vineyard? Where is it? What's the exposition like? What's the soil like?
Mitans is lying on in mid slope, at more or less at the same altitude and level as Caillerets, Champagne. Basically, you have Caillerets, Champagne, and above you have Caillerets, Clos des Ducs, you know, and below you have nothing. Or you have nothing. You have not Premier Cru. So you have two layers of Premier Cru. One is under the road, the 73, and this is where you find the Caillerets. This is where you find the Caillerets, Champagne, Mitans, and above you have Clos des Chênes, Taillepied, and Clos des Ducs, which is a little bit further above. But so this is where I like the Mitans. One thing that is remarkable for the Mitans is that it is, as you know, Domaine de Montille is a proponent of the whole cluster vinification, and Mitans is almost the only vineyard to be year in, year out 100% whole cluster, except if it has been, you know, hammered by hailstorm or things like that. But otherwise, the vineyard is quite old and always have a very limited production with only a few clusters per vine, and the clusters are always in perfect condition because there are only a few of them, and because the vine is old and it's maybe a little bit hill as well. But it's one of the late ripening vineyard.
So even though it's small yields, it actually ripens later.
Yes, yes. In this case, because we think that the vineyard is slightly degenerated, so it doesn't produce a lot, but whatever it's producing is of the very, very top quality, and it allows us to make to perform a 100% whole cluster vinification in almost every vintage. And you have 100% whole cluster here, as usual, but you don't feel it. You feel the spiciness. We love whole cluster. Why do we love whole cluster? Just because we believe that it contributes to the complexity of the aromatics, bringing some spices, some floral tone, you know, like pivoine and roses and things like that. And it also enhance the mineral content, kind of a stony character, which we like. And in the mouth, if it's well handled, of course, if it's well handled, it complements the tannin structure. And as there is a preconceived idea where whole cluster means harsher tannins, this is where it happens. It can happen very easily if you don't really know how to handle the whole cluster. But if you know how to handle it, and if you handle it very gently and rightly, it, on the contrary, softens the tannin structure. There is no textbook. There is no guide for whole cluster vinification. It's only gut feeling and experience. And the more you have, the more you feel comfortable using. The more experience you have, the more you feel comfortable using whole cluster. And you have some famous domains that you know very well, like Dujac, and DRC and Leroy and Confuron and some others, you know, but you don't have that many in Burgundy that use whole cluster on a very consistent and regular basis. But all those domains are feeling confident and they have the experience to manage the whole cluster the right way. And I do like the wine coming from whole cluster. I
mean, the one argument against whole cluster, aside from perhaps whether it produces some rustic tannins, but I think that's just bad use of whole cluster.
Because you extract too much.
Yeah.
When you are on whole cluster vinification, you stop thinking about extraction and you're thinking about infusion, like a tea.
Okay. Yeah.
And not like extraction, mechanical extraction with pigeage or you know, or long maceration. No, you have to be very gentle.
But how? Yeah, I suppose the one debate would be, I would say, is how do you ensure that the whole bunch doesn't interfere with the sense of terroir?
That's a good one. That's a good question. It's exactly how do you ensure that the new oak is not interfering with the.
Yeah, interfering is probably the wrong word, but But dominating.
Dominating.
Yeah, rather than enhancing.
I think it's like the new oak.
Yeah.
It's like new oak. It's like new oak. If you have a misuse of new oak or overuse of new oak, then it's covering the terroir. If you use it the right way with the right copper and the right wood with the right proportion, you still feel the terroir. And many of the top domains that you represent are using a lot of new oak, and they are still greatly expressing the terroir. So the wort cluster is exactly the same, but it is a stylistic choice. It is a stylistic choice. The same way that being 100% this stem is a stylistic choice. Who is telling you why the berries only would be the translator of the terroir? Why the stem is not part of it? You have a lot of things in the stems. You have all the minerals, and so it's a nice debate that I would love to have with one of my colleagues who is not a proponent of wort cluster. But what I can see is that among the young generation, you have more and more people interested in using somehow a bit of wort cluster, because they don't necessarily go to the 100%, because 100% is really a statement or style choice, but maybe 30, 50, because they are very conscious about the positive contribution of wort cluster to the terroir, to the quality of the wine, the complexity, and the quality of the overall style of the wine.
Just to finish on this wine, which I do think is terrific. I think the silkiness of the tannins is beautiful. The purity, the coolness of the fruit, the balance is just great.
One of the other benefits, I'm sorry to interrupt, one of the other great benefits of wort cluster, and especially given the climate change and global warming, is that it brings some freshness and some mintiness in the wine, and that balance out, some fruit that could be a little bit too ripe and cooked by the heat wave.
I mean, it's because it's in such perfect harmony. One can be lulled into a false sense of thinking, right, I can drink that now. But in a way, it would be a great shame, because I think there's much more nuance to come. Your drinking window for this wine? 5 to 10 years, more. But with the potential. With the potential, of course. Those wines. One of the drawbacks of the wort cluster of the wort cluster vinification, is that the wines are more moody when they're young until they reach age of, let's say, maturity. Like they are teenagers. They are turbulent teenagers until 5 to 7 years. And then after they settle down and they offer a beautiful sense of harmony, integration, and an ethereal quality. Well, let's say that's terrific. Well, we're gonna swap villages now and move to Pommard. So yeah, I was slightly unsure which of these wines we should taste first, because generally you would taste perhaps Pézerolles before Vougeot. Definitely. But then you've got two very contrasting vintages. So I think we're gonna move to the 14 Rugiens Bas, which you'll explain why that's so important in a moment. Attached to this bar. So bas means the lower part, because you have two Rugiens in two vineyards, two different vineyards, even 3 different vineyards bearing the name of Rugien in Pommard. You have Rugien as a village level vineyard. You have Rugien Haut, which is the upper part, and you have Rugien Bas, which is the lower part. And everyone knows that the Rugien Bas is likely to be one of the very best, if it's not the best, vineyard in Pommard. It has been picked to be the village of Pommard picked that vineyard of Rugien Bas to be proposed for an upgrade to Grand Cru status. The process is very long. We don't know whether it will be successful, but whatever the result is, it just means that the
collectivity, the community of winemaker in Pommard recognized in this vineyard something very special. And there is something very special. The name Rugiens comes from rouge, that is red. And because that part, the Rugiens Bas, which is fairly small, it's 5.2 hectares, something like that, had a very special clay with a high content of iron outside, which is red, hence the name of Rugiens. And that iron outside provides the wine with an extra dimension in all components, in the complexity of the nose, the depth of the wine, the ageability, and that's what makes this terroir very special. And we are privileged to be the largest owner of Rugiens Bas. We have 1 hectare of Rugiens Bas, and this is definitely one of the flagship wine of Domaine de Montille, and it was the favorite wine of my father together with the Tapier.
Well, it's easy to understand why. In terms of 2014, how was that for Pommard generally, and
challenging, because that was the last year of the Côte de Beaune, and especially Volnay and Pommards has been hit by hailstorm 3 years in a row, 12, 13, 14. So that was the last of those 3 challenging vintages. But thanks to the experience, the third year, we learned from the previous years, how to manage it, and when you have a vineyard hit by hail, you are a kind of rescue mode for the vineyard. And what we want is to have a wine that is very clean in terms of aromatics, doesn't have any kind of ale taste.
The goût de grêle.
The goût de grêle, exactly.
Yeah.
And we want the wine to be fresh as well.
Are you, in terms of whole bunch, and when there's hail around, what can you do?
You slow down. You slow down dramatically. This is maybe maximum 1/3. Only the Mitans made it through, and I don't even know if the Mitans was 2/3. No, 14 in 14 it was 2. He was 100%. He was 2/3 in 13 because he was badly in 13. But all right, so you slow down, of course, because you don't have the same confidence in the quality of the stem. The stem could bring some herbaceous or some dry wood character.
Yeah.
So we're very careful about that. Wort cluster for us is not a kind of a paramount or religion. We use it because we love it, but we use it only when we feel that it will contribute positively to the wine. And if the circumstances or the condition do not allow it, whether because the vine has been affected by disease or being affected by the storm, hailstorm, or we will refrain ourselves to use it. That's it.
How much production did you lose in 14?
About 30%, more than 30%.
And in terms of again, new oak, where are we here?
We have about 50% on Rugiens Bas, 40 to 50. But when you have a vintage that is hit by hail, only the time heals. So you have to be patient. And I have a great example of 2001 or 2004, where Volnay and Pommards were hammered by hail. That was really tough, and you remember that, because you were in the business at the time. That were really, really tough when tasting the wine in barrels, and even when selling the wine.
I remember 01 very well, actually.
And but when we could pop up the cork of one of those, one or four, and it would be delicious right now. And all the harshness or tiredness that was induced by the hailstorm is gone. And there is a magic effect of time over wine when it comes from great terroir.
When, you know, following 12, 13, 14, 3 vintages of hail, I know, you know, other domains lost 1.5 to 2 vintages equivalent in those 3 years. Was there a point where people were thinking this is the end for Volnay and Pommard long term? Was it that this was a new phenomenon where there was going to be hail every year? Or?
I think, you know, very fortunately, most of them, and especially all of those you're working with, are very solid domain, because they are ancient, they have experience, they know that when there is a great vintage, you don't sell everything, you keep a little bit of wine. And this is all, you know, most of my colleagues do that, because we are in agriculture. We never know what next year will be. And if you have a great vintage, bringing you quality and quantity, just be smart enough, you know, not to sell everything, but to keep to keep some wine for years that will be more challenging and sometimes catastrophic. And this is and we have you know, we have about 6 years of inventories in our cellar, including the recent vintage and things like that. But so let's say 5 years. So we have 5 years of inventories in our cellar, and if something really happened, so we are reselling a little bit of older vintages, and that helps you passing that bad phases.
You talked about drinking windows on quite a few of the other wines. The 14 Rugiens bar, when would you? To me, it still seems very youthful. I mean,
it is very useful, and as you see, there's the tannins are still a little bit harsh. They need to round up. They need to be more integrated. I will say, you know, wait another 5 years, and you will see the benefit, because it's just at the time where it's going to develop some tertiary aromas and where the tannins will get more integrated. So another 5-7 years would be great from now on. So which means 10 to 15 years after being produced, you know.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to go on to the last wine now. And actually, it begs an interesting question. Do we think climate change, presuming we all agree it's happening, and apart from maybe one person on the other side of the water, but would you say, as an appellation, it's been actually quite beneficial for Pommard?
For all the entire Burgundy.
Yeah. But especially Pommard, I'm thinking where maybe at times in a challenging vintage, the rusticity of tannin can be...
Pommard is, you know, Pommard is, the vineyard of Pommard is split by the village of Pommard. And the village of Pommard is in the Combe, is in the valley, where some cool breezes come from the west. And it's, some of the vineyard there sometimes struggle to get the appropriate ripeness. And that was especially true, you know, until recently with the climate change. But Pommard, you're completely right. Pommard do benefit so far from the climate change. If the climate change could stop exactly where we are now, that would be perfect. But we all know, Jason, that unfortunately it's not going to stop here. I think in the future, and not that far, in a fairly near future, Burgundy is going to face some great challenges, and we will have to really and deeply adapt our farming practices. We may need to adapt our vegetal material. We're not going to plant Syrah or Merlot, of course not, but we will have to find the right vegetal materials, you know, and adapt our farming practices so that the wine that will be produced in 50 years' time will still be Burgundian and not Californian or Australian or whatever, you know. But that would need, this, you know, if there is a challenge for the next generation of vignerons, this is this one.
Yeah.
This is this one. And in my opinion, this is the main challenge they will have to face.
And it's not just warmer summers, is it? It's warmer, warmer winters.
Winter, warmer spring, when things, you know, gets off at the end of March, and then after suddenly at the end of April, you have a cold front, you know, coming from the Arctics and just frost. As we've seen in 16 and
right. So we've done 16 and 14, which I suppose one would consider more classic vintages in a sense that they're not so voluptuous. We come to 2015, and this is the Pommard Pézerolles. So say a little bit about Pézerolles as in relation to both Rugiens and Mitans.
Pézerolles is one of the flagship vineyards of Domaine de Montille as well. It's probably, you know, and I don't want to be pretentious, not at all, but I will say that Domaine de Montille is part of those domains that has put Pézerolles on the map. And my father loved that vineyard because Pézerolles is likely one of the most subtle and elegant terroir in Pommard. And it's probably in style, it's probably the closest to Volnay, while geographically is at the complete opposite. But you have to look further, the border of Pézerolles, and the next vineyard that you find is Cru des Mitans, which you know is one of a very elegant and
very stony in parts.
Stony,
as well.
exactly.
Yeah. And 2015 was an exciting vintage, but presumably one that required at times a different approach.
You know, thanks to you guys, I have the opportunity of tasting one of my 15s, because this is definitely the kind of vintage I'm not going to get a bottle for supper. And I've not tasted a 15 for almost 2 years, and I'm happy to see that you have a great freshness of sherry, red sherry, a red and black sherry character. Together, this is 2 further wort cluster, by the way, and you can feel the spices, and you can feel also the floral touch in it. I do enjoy the nose a lot. It's not chilled on at all. It's fairly open and giving. Let's now taste the wine. That might be another story. Yeah, the structure is monumental. The tannins are here to present. They are well coated. But
I still think they're very fine featured tannins, aren't they?
They are very fine. There is a fine grain of tannins, but they are present, and you definitely need time with this vintage. That was often compared to the 05 vintage. And the 05 vintage now start to open up, and they are beautiful wine. And I have no doubt that the 15 will follow more or less the same way. There is more roundness in the 15 than the 05. So in my opinion, those 15 will come around earlier on than the 05. And rather than waiting for 15 years, I think, 10 to 12 years would be a good guess. But you need time, and everyone knows that 15 vintage is not the one that is going to come first online when it comes to drinkability.
But I think what you've been able to do with this wine is still capture a purity and a finesse.
There's a great deal of that. I love the nose.
In a vintage that is clearly very powerful. I get the slight impression that maybe it's just starting to shut down, but it's still showing a lot. Yeah.
And we tasting all those wines. We're tasting without food. As soon as you pair it with food, the food component softening the tannin structure.
Yeah, that's terrific. It's the sheer power, but no sense of heat at all. Personally, I think, speak as a generality, that I find more Pinot character in some 2015s than I do in some 2005s. And I do
agree with you.
I do. Whether that's something that's been learned through vintages, you know, following 09 as well, which is another warm vintage, and now there's, yeah, we're picking earlier, we're adapting vinification.
It's one of the great jobs in the world where you're learning every single year, even if you have 50 years. I remember Michel Lafarge, who you know well, and unfortunately left us this year. He had something like 70 years of experience, and he was explaining to us that there is always something to learn. There is always something to connect and to, comprehend and understand. And it is a very wise statement from a great man of Burgundy and a great winemaker.
Well, I think that's probably a very good moment to end the tasting on, Etienne. Thank you so much. That was terrific, and I think a really fascinating investigation into what just a small number of the wines that you're now producing. We haven't even looked at the Côte de Nuits. We'll perhaps save that for another time. So from here in a rather sunny and beautiful Puligny-Montrachet, thank you all very much.